The author says, Takbir. Our Shaykh mentioned this integral second, meaning in the Mukhtasar, the summary of obligatory knowledge. Like in some copies of Abu Shuja', Takbir is mentioned second. So the first one would be intention. That's going to be the first integral mentioned. And then the second integral would be Takbir, if you're going like the Mukhtasar. Or like in some copies of Abu Shuja'. And in other copies, it is third after standing, like here. So mentioning the Takbir here, third, is following a copy of Abu Shuja'. The Prophet ﷺ said to the man who invalidated his prayer, إِذَا قُمْتَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَكَبِّرْ. If you stood to pray, say Allahu Akbar, to recall the greatness of whom one wants to obey. One must completely say while standing, So saying this takbir and standing are simultaneous, if you're able to stand, of course, so that the prayer will initiate as an obligation. If you're praying an obligatory prayer, you're going to have to stand and say the takbir for the prayer to initiate as an obligation. So if it's a sunnah prayer and you're sitting facing the qibla and you said Allahu Akbar with an intention, this would be enough to initiate your prayer. At least loud enough to hear oneself. Not just moving his tongue, but loud enough to hear himself. Even from the inside of his own head. Even if it's so low, but he could hear himself from the inside, that's valid. In Arabic, if able to learn. So he has to say Allahu Akbar. I never met anyone who can't say it, but sometimes they just need to repeat it a few times. And it won't be perfect, but it could still be valid. Like they might say Allahu Akbar. That new person, he'd say Allahu Akbar, for example. So that as he practice and he work on himself, then he'll fix his pronunciation, inshallah. You said, should I be standing when I say takbir when praying sunnah prayer? You don't have to be. But you lose half the reward. If you pray sunnah prayer sitting while able to stand, you have half the reward of the one who prays standing. And if you pray sunnah prayer laying down if you pray sunnah prayer laying down while able to not lay down, then you have half the reward of the one who prays sitting. So if my math is right, that means quarter of the reward of the one who prays standing. So to recall the greatness of whom one wants to obey, one must completely say while standing, so that the prayer initiates as an obligation. At least loud enough to hear himself in Arabic if able to learn, or else to translate it into any language. If he couldn't say it in Arabic, he could translate it into any language. No language has priority over any other language when he's translating, in this case, for the inability to say it in Arabic. I mean, it's not a condition that he translates it into his own language. So he might say in English, for example, God is greatest, without having to repeat after learning if he were not negligent. Meaning, this one who's translating, he's saying to start his prayer, God is greatest. Will he have to repeat his prayer later after he learns? Not if he is not negligent in this ignorance of his. Not if he is not negligent in this ignorance of his. How would he be not negligent in this ignorance of his? Like he's a new Muslim, he just never had chance yet. Or he grew up away from scholars. So then he will not have to repeat his prayer later because he's not negligent here. So it's understood from that the one who's like this, and he is negligent, he had enough time to learn how to say Allahu Akbar for himself. Yani, just not talk about average time, talk about his own personal case. He had enough time for someone, yani, for himself to learn how to say Allahu Akbar, and he was able to. He wasn't secluded from scholars or something like that. So if he were negligent, then it's understood from this that he would have to make up his prayers. Yani, he's gonna have to pray on time now while he is negligent, and then he's gonna have to make up those prayers later. So one does not replace it with another formula. Yani, you're not gonna say something other than Allahu Akbar. Either you're going to say Allahu Akbar or you're going to translate it into another language, any other language. And you're not going to say, instead of a takbir, a tahmeed or a tasbih or a hawqala or any other formula. Rather, you're going to do what is called a takbir. You will say Allahu Akbar according to the Prophet's technique, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Yani, you're going to say Allahu Akbar because that's how the Prophet prayed. And it is better to do so while lifting one's hands, directing the palms towards the Qibla, starting when saying the Takbir and lowering them when finishing the Takbir. Yani, so you're standing already. You're facing the Qibla. So if you're standing, probably your arms are at your sides, if you're standing normally. And now you want to pray. So you say Allahu Akbar. You start raising your hands from the time you start saying Allah, and your hands are back down by the time you finish saying Akbar. That's the meaning of starting when starting the takbir and lowering them when finishing the takbir. Yani, by the time you finish. They are back down by the time you finish your takbir. So you'd be raising your hands, Allahu Akbar, and putting them back down. Directing the palms towards the Qibla and having the fingers bent a little bit. And having the hands parallel to your ears. Abu Dawood and At-Tirmidhi narrated, and Al-Hakim deemed authentic according to the condition of Muslim, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Miftahu salati tuhur wa tahrimuha takbir wa tahliluha taslim. The key to unlock the prayer is purification. Yani, the key to gain access to. That's the meaning of unlocking the prayer. To gain access to the prayer is purification. And what commits you to the sanctity of the prayer is the takbir. Yani, the consecration of the prayer is the takbir. وَتَحْلِيلُهَا التَّسْلِيمُ, and what releases one from the restrictions of the prayer is the taslim. So the key to unlock the prayer, to grant access to the prayer, is purification. And what commits you to the sanctity of the prayer is the takbir, and what releases you from the restrictions of the prayer is the taslim, the salam. There are also numerous other hadiths. Some said that this is the meaning of God's word. Yani, this is the tafsir of this ayah. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى in Surah Al-A'la. He mentioned the name of his Lord, then prayed. So some said this mentioning of the name of his Lord is the takbir for the prayer, and then he prays. Consecration. Consecration. Yeah. That means like making something sanctified. which is what the takbir is, the tahrim is, or the taharrum. That's what the taharrum does. Makes your actions sanctified, meaning you are now engaged in the prayer. Thus, one must say those two words, Allahu and Akbar, even with Al on the second, according to what is famous. Meaning, it's valid had a person said Allahul Akbar. We're not saying to say it, we're just saying, had you said it, it would be valid. Since it is still a takbir in name, saying Allahul Akbar, that's a takbir, and that's what you're obligated to do to start your prayer, a takbir. So that would be valid. And also because the addition indicates glorification. Yani the Al, if you did put Al in there, all it did was increase the glorification. So it's not going to be invalid. A word like Al-Jalil in between is valid. Like if he says, Allahul Jalilu Akbar, because the interruption is short. Don't do it though. You're just learning your religion here. Because the interruption is short, which is that word Al-Jalil. So it's not affecting. But not a wow. Not even before. Yani he doesn't say Wallahu Akbar, and he doesn't say Allahu wa Akbar like in the verdicts of Al-Qaffal. Yani that's documented in the verdicts of Al-Qaffal. Without a long pause in between. Yani you don't say Allahu, and then you have a long pause, and then eventually you say Akbar, because that is definitely invalid for taking the expression out of being a takbir. Splitting the two words apart like that with that long pause corrupts the takbir. It won't be considered a takbir. The two words are separated now. Therefore, it is not valid to say Ar-Rahmanu Akbar or Ar-Rabbu Akbar instead of Allah. Not valid. And it's not valid to say Kabir or Ajal or Azam instead of Akbar. You can't say Allahu Kabir or Allahu Ajal or Allahu Azam, all of which they have meaning close to Akbar. It's not valid though, since that's not a takbir. Saying Allahu Ajal, that's not called a takbir. Or saying Allahu Azam, that's not called a takbir. And it is invalid to say Allahu with an extension in the front, since it's a question. When you say like that, if you were to say it like that, you're asking a question. Allahu, is Allah such and such? Like if one were to say Allahu Akbar, then he's saying, is God greatest? So that's invalid because it's a question. And it's invalid to say Akbar. That means big drums. Akbar with an alif before the last letter. Subhanallah. You'll hear a lot of people saying Akbar, especially in adhan. They don't know what to stretch and what not to stretch. So if you heard somebody saying Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, then teach them if you can, inshallah. Tell them not to extend that. Because Akbar means big drums. Akbar with an alif before the last letter. And also Akbar, Akbar with the shadda on the ra, a doubled ra at the end. That's not valid because all of these alterations that I just mentioned, they corrupt the meaning. They alter the meaning in such a way that that statement does not stand validly for the prayer. And one must observe the order. So, he has to say Allahu first and then Akbar second. So saying Akbarullah is not valid, as Ash-Shafi'i himself documented. And we have a digression here. Since we're talking about the takbir, let's mention the other takbirs. So this takbir we were just talking about is takbiratul ihram, the takbir of consecration, or takbiratul taharrum, the takbir of consecration. Consecration means here the takbir that makes your actions sanctified, religiously sanctified. So that's a takbir, but there's other takbirs that are sunnah to do throughout the prayer. And raising the hands also. So what is meant is to start saying Allahu Akbar when starting to descend into ruku'. So we already talked about saying Allahu Akbar to start your prayer. Now you've recited your Fatiha, and you said all your du'as in the beginning, and you recited Al-Fatiha, and you said Ameen, and you recited a short surah in the first or second rak'ah, and now you want to make ruku'. So you should say Allahu Akbar when starting descent into ruku'. And like we said, you're going to start saying Allahu Akbar when you start bending down for ruku'. You're going to finish saying Allahu Akbar when you finish bending over into ruku'. And starting descent into sujood after standing or sitting. Starting descent into sujood, so you're going to say Allahu Akbar, yani. You were reciting Al-Fatiha, then you bowed, then you stood up. So you're standing here. Then you wanted to go down to sujood. So you say Allahu Akbar as you go down to sujood. So starting descent into sujood after standing or after sitting. Yani, you made your first sujood now. Then you said Allahu Akbar, came up from sujood. Now you're sitting. So you want to go back down again. So you're going to say Allahu Akbar. So that's the meaning here. Starting the descent into sujood, that means you were standing and then you came all the way down to sujood. You're going to say Allahu Akbar while you come down. Or you were sitting and now you're going to make your next sujood. You're going to say Allahu Akbar as your head as your face goes towards the floor. And all these times you're going to be making the dhikr fit inside of the movement. Finish saying it by the time you finish the movement. So you're going to say Allahu Akbar when you're rising up from sujood also. You're already in sujood and then you're going to come up, so you're going to say Allahu Akbar. You're going to start saying that when your head lifts from the ground, and you're going to say Akbar by the time your buttocks lands and you settle into your seating position. So what do some people do? They just say the dhikr, but they don't make it stretch for the duration of their move. So if he's coming up from sujood, he might just say Allahu Akbar and then he's still moving, although he finished saying Akbar. If you want the sunnah, you're not going to say Akbar, and you're not going to say the end, that last R sound in Akbar until your buttocks lands, for example, if you were lifting your head from sujood to sit. Inshallah, that's clear for you. If you have a question, you can ask. And also, you're going to say Allahu Akbar when you start to stand after the first tashahhud. So that same thing. You're going to finish your tashahhud and make salah on the Prophet. Now you want to stand up. So from the time you start your movement to stand, you're going to start Allahu Akbar. You might stretch it there because you're standing up from the floor and need a second or two more. So that you start the takbir when you started moving and you finish that takbir by the time you settled into that position. So standing after the first tashahhud. In these four cases, one stretches it until he finishes the position, like I just told you. You said, can we say hawqala or other dhikr in the prayer? Dhikr does not invalidate the prayer in any position. But if you put it in between the ayahs of the Fatiha, it will invalidate your recitation, and you're going to have to start your recitation over. Ameen wa fikum.